So good afternoon and thank you for joining us, and I'm just going to join with a video, and we're also going to be hopefully joined by Jo Maule, the e-learning manager from Talbot Heath School, and hopefully everyone can hear me. So Jo, hopefully your camera can come on and your microphone.
Hello.
Oh, Jo, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are
I'm
you?
here too. Imagine that. You need to press that button to join. So I'm really grateful for your time, Jo. I know it's a horrendously busy time, not just for you, but the education system as a whole. And I know that we've got some very esteemed colleagues in the audience as well. So whilst they might not be able to see who's here, I certainly can. And I know that it's going to be thoroughly exciting. So, Jo, I guess just an introduction to you, and then we'll kind of talk around the agenda and so on, and maybe where you work as well. That would be a good start.
Absolutely. Yeah, so thanks for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. So I work at Talbot Heath School, which is in Bournemouth, on the sunny south coast in Dorset, and I am the e-learning manager, if I can pronounce my own job title.
Are you sure?
It's always a bonus. I think I am, yeah. So yeah, that's it. I mean, I look after, we've got almost 700 iPads at the school, and I also run the RTC, because we're an Apple Regional Training Centre. And yeah, I'm a teacher, so I do a little bit of teaching as well, and also look after sort of a lot of the staff training when it comes to technology.
Great. And I guess I've done a few of these webinars. So for those who know me, not another introduction, but Tom Abel Green. For those who don't know me, I'm the UK Education Solutions Manager for the Academia Group. And I will apologise that the whole road decides to be being built on on my side. So if you can hear that, I'm really sorry. I can't go and shut them down, but hopefully it's okay. So Jo, we I guess are looking today about talking around the Talbot Heath journey, and I think that the relevance around that is academia actually weren't your partner at the very beginning, and you and I met at an event that was being hosted by an Apple regional an Apple store, I should say, and it was one of those education events.
Yes.
But I think what's been great is actually we've absolutely built a strong relationship, and we've been able to support the school in lots of areas. But I guess from our perspective today is talking around sharing your story with our listeners. Really, it was also to kind of, we'll talk about why iPads, we'll talk about the financing of that, because I think that's a really hot topic. CPD and staff training, as you've rightly mentioned, is core to this. So we'll touch on that. And then I guess what's great about Talbot Heath is you've actually been able to see what those outcomes are like from a one-to-one iPad program, and you hopefully be able to share some of that story. And I guess one of the hot conversations is, you know, a lot of these decision-making processes around technology are always at the forefront, I guess, of a conversation piece with SLT, but COVID-19 has driven that even further forward, and you guys were in a really fortunate position, and I know even some of our listeners on the call, on the webinar today are in that position as well, but it'd be great to understand how that transition was. And then I guess the only benefit that I can see of COVID is really that, or the positive, it's not a benefit, the positive has been actually how we reshape and we can help look at what the future of education could look like. And I guess that's where we'll end on. So with next slide, I guess I'll move on. Jo, the Talbot Heath journey, was there an old way?
Yes, there was an old way, definitely. I was fortunate enough actually to work at the school quite a few years ago, in a previous incarnation, if you like, where I was the IT technician before I decided for my sins to become a teacher. So yeah, it was really interesting to see how it used to be and how it is now, and how it's changed. And I think a couple of things really mainly was the old head. It was very much a traditional school, and everybody knows in the local area and beyond, really, Talbot Heath's got a very strong history. It's sort of 136 years old. So, you know, it's got a very strong history in the local area. And yeah, and that was it really. But when our new head came along, Harrod Holloway. She had quite a different vision for the school at the time, and we noticed that I wasn't actually at the school at the very, very beginning of the iPad journey, I'll be completely honest, but they were looking at the time about the benefits and pros of mobile learning, really, and also starting to move away from that old sort of let's book the computer room for a lesson sort of outdated model, really. So being quite a visionary head as she is, really, that it was something that they wanted to look into and sort of explore further.
And that's really the really important part. Is it's not saying the old head was bad. I just think that what we absolutely know is that you know, head teachers have different visions, and actually the exploration and using technology is key. I think it's also fair to say, for those who don't know, you talk about the pedigree of Talbot Heath in terms of history, but actually from a results perspective, I think we should also just touch on that, because Talbot Heath is absolutely the leading independent girls' school, right? And the results show that, but also lots of other things around the school also highlight that. I think last year your exam results were nuts, weren't they? They were just insane.
They are, yeah. We were definitely the #1 performing school in the area and beyond, actually, for A-level results, and we're definitely up there with GCSE results. We've had 100% A to C pass rate. In the past, we're normally around 99, 98% at the very worst. So yeah, very excellent. Sort of 5+ GCSEs A to C, and again with A levels, pretty outstanding, to be honest.
Yeah. And no one's going to say that iPad made you that, right? But I think technology has played a part in that, and I think it's about developing the skill sets of the girls that are at the school, beyond just from a teaching perspective, but actually as an all-round citizen, isn't it? And I think that falls part into it as well. So in terms of moving, I guess, to the new way, I certainly know that the way that we've been able to support your journey is through the one-to-one scheme around how do you fund that, and that is really about financing through a lease. What was that a tough decision to make from your perspective in terms of moving down that finance route? Because you've got a really strong accounting team, haven't you? So it's very robust.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely. And I think it was a sort of tough decision to make. Being an independent school, obviously a fee-paying school, we do have that element, which is ultimately where the iPads sort of came in, really, amongst some other changes that were kind of adopted at the school at the same year. We had brand new sports complex, gym, etc., like new roofs on, obviously, some of the older buildings. So things like that, unfortunately, not very exciting, very important. Looking at that, and we don't get pupil premium and things like that, that some of the state schools do. So it is completely sort of self-funded. But I mean, it was good because the fees didn't rise that much, actually. And the leasing was a really great option that actually we weren't really sort of sure what existed at the beginning. So it's made it kind of affordable, if you like. It's a really good option. It obviously means that every 3 years we get all the students and staff get a brand new iPad, which is brilliant. So we're never behind with technology.
And so the culture's got the school's got a culture just generally, but the iPad is kind of part of that culture, isn't it? It's kind of like I go to Talbot Heath and I have a device. The engagement from a stakeholder perspective, I think from a teacher perspective is one thing, but from a parental perspective, do you think that that's as positive as it's always been in terms of for their students, for their children?
Absolutely. I think when you said before about the history of the school, and we sort of mentioned that, it has been very different, and we are looking at the moment at kind of quantitative and qualitative results, but at the same time we know sort of firsthand from the get-go that the impact that having the iPad at the school for every single student, and it's just sort of added a whole new layer to their learning, and it's meant that they've always got the device on them. It's like a bit of a cliched phrase, but like a digital textbook or digital pencil case. So you just pull it out of your bag, and that's it. They've got their books there, their e-textbooks. They want to look things up on the internet. They've got a calculator. We can Zoom now. We'll probably come back to that, I should imagine, at some point. But it's kind of like a one-stop shop, really, device. I honestly, now when I see people at the schools, and I just think, how do you manage without one, honestly?
So it's interesting, actually, just on the finance piece. I know it's partly about funding it, but actually one of the things that I often spend a lot of time talking to leadership teams about is the sustainability element of a project, and normally we can see sort of the first 1 to 3 years and how that works. It's the longer term of that. And you mentioned about that digital pencil case, and it's in a kind of an all-in-one device, but have you genuinely been able to make some savings, some operational efficiency savings around the use of paper, the use of books? Because I was talking to a school yesterday, and they were saying, if we were to buy a handwritten notebook for each of our pupils, it would cost us about £10,000 a year. And if we moved to a device that had the ability to do some of that, we could probably in the first year halve it, and maybe in year 3 not have that cost. Is that the same for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I will be honest, it has been very much a learning curve at times. It really has. And you know, we've sort of spent quite a lot of time researching different apps and things like that. And you know, some of them, maybe the take up wasn't as great as we initially hoped, and others have just been a phenomenal success. Success. But you're quite right. We switched to paper planners or diaries, depending on, you know, what you call them at different schools. But yeah, homework diaries, planners, etc., to an app. Again, the first app that we went with, it wasn't really the best, if I'm honest. It was okay, but the one that we've moved to now is fantastic. It's very easy to administer, and I think that's a key part of it, is how easy it is to administer. Yeah, definitely. The thing that I personally like the most is that we can actually kind of, if you like, buy licenses for apps and books. So whereas before with a physical textbook, we do sometimes have staff a little bit like, oh, this is quite alternative, I'm not used to this from the school that I've come from. So we ask them, well, actually, once you have a book, it's got like a finite lifespan where, you know, students will write their name in and it will just get dog-eared and tattered and, you know, pages ripped out or torn. You know, luckily we don't have too much of that here, but just accidentally. But whereas with the licenses, we just put them in a pot and there's nothing physical to damage. And when that student gets to the end of their sort of journey at Talbot Heath and they leave, we just reallocate the license to someone else. So and the updates are instant. So whereas before, when I taught A-level ICT at my previous school, it was really frustrating because by the time the textbook's published, kind of already out of date. But whereas with some of the online textbooks, you know, they're updated like daily, weekly, so it's always up to date as well, which is another bonus.
So I know we've got a question around that from Sasha, who also is an independent school. But before we answer that, Sasha, so I have noted that just so you know, we talk about what you just mentioned, Jo, and the workflow piece. You talk about apps, and we'll touch on that, and the cloud computing piece. So actually, one of the myths around iPad specifically is that if you use an iPad, you can't be Google and you can't be Office 365. And if you use G Suite, you have to use Chromebook or likewise. You're actually a G Suite backbone, right? So you make use of those Google apps, and they fit great with the iPad as well as the other additional apps that you use. And the other bit you mentioned around not a barrier from staff, but a mindset change can often be a conversation piece, right? Is if I've always done something in a certain way, then I have to continue to do it. From a CPD perspective, once you can get that mindset changed, people are more open to using those apps. And just before you answer, Jo, what app have you used now, or what are you using as a planning tool for your students that you just mentioned?
Okay, so I'm allowed to mention the app that we specifically use at the moment. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So we switched to one called Homework 4, which is great because since I don't want to get too techie for some people, because obviously they're just sort of zone out, because I can totally appreciate what it can be like at times. Quite a lot of apps and other sort of websites implemented something called single sign-on not so long ago, which means that essentially, if you don't know what that is, you can just sign in with your Google account, and every member of staff and student at our school already has a Google or Gmail account under our Talbot Heath domain, which is brilliant because we don't have to create separate usernames, passwords, etc. And Homework 4 was one of those that linked to our MIS system, and also had SSO as a feature. So that was great from the IT kind of perspective. It's like a no-brainer. The students found it really easy to use. They just ran with it. The teachers have found it really easy to use in comparison to the one that we opted for before. It's actually been great, genuinely great. Homework 4, I'd recommend that. Great.
And that's really important. I think it's one of those things, it's about sharing, and it's not always that's going to suit someone else. It's just what's worked for you. And I think one of the things that we often talk about is having a core set of apps, and that is the apps that are absolutely necessary as part of your journey, and then those more apps that add value to some of the stuff that you need to do. And you mentioned around the the app licenses and the management. And it's just a topic on here, the infrastructure piece. One of the key successes to your project, which is an ongoing conversation. We won't go into much detail, but having a mobile device management solution is key. And I know that we're supporting your journey in looking at the next steps of what that looks like. But that's a massive important element to consider, isn't it? The infrastructure of the network in terms of capacity versus the robustness, and then also the deployment and the management of your devices, especially where you've got learners who aren't boarders and need to be at home, and the security around that is a key, right?
Absolutely, yeah, couldn't agree more. 100%. I think actually, occasionally, I do get asked things like that, and they say, what would be the most important part of the journey, and what could you recommend, and things like that. But yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. I think the mobile device management system that you have, which kind of essentially sort of does what it says on it, manages the devices and gives you control over them. I know some schools and educational establishments go with bring your own device, which again is a completely different route, but for us, we like to have complete control over all of the devices, so that actually, if one goes missing or is lost, we can lock it down straight away, and that's it. It's completely bricked, if you like. There's nothing that can be done. If a teacher needs an app distributed very quickly, to their class, we can push it out and it will appear on their iPads within a few minutes, and they're ready to hit the ground running. So yeah, that's great for us. But you're right, and academia have been brilliant with helping with that. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I will not ask for the engineering team, but what I think the important thing actually, Jo, is the transparency and the black and white of that is that there are, I think, 200 MDMs on the market, right, and 180, and the reality is there's only a handful that will really meet the teaching and learning needs, bar the outside the box or beyond the box stuff. And one of the things that you're having to do is now making sure the MDM allows the teaching and learning to continue. And so that's the conversation for you, isn't it? And the use of managed Apple IDs and those sorts of things is key. So I guess moving on, we absolutely have to talk about this building. Hopefully we can all see it. This is incredible, right? Because the building essentially, or Talbot Heath School, is over lots of old buildings, and they're quite separated in some instances. You've got some bunkers, which is really interesting. But this building, tell us very quickly about this, Jo. How does it? I mean, I've seen this from the ground up, right? So tell us about it.
Yeah. Okay, so this is our STEAM hub. So for those people who aren't familiar, perhaps with STEM and STEAM, if you like. So our head was quite keen to include the A, if you like, in STEAM, so the arts. And yeah, we're very, very lucky to have this new building. It was opened in September last year, so it's sort of coming up to almost a year old. And it has some fantastic facilities, which again is just built on that vision, really, to have the contemporary side of the school that matches with the technology and iPads, etc., as well as our traditional historic buildings with the bunkers, as you say, as well, and things like that. So it is great. We've got the best of both worlds, if you like. But in the building we have a really nice indoor swimming pool. It used to be an outdoor swimming pool until the hub was built, so that was redone, which is great. We have links with Pool Swim Academy. It's used constantly by other people all day, every day, weekends and evenings. We have some very dedicated swimmers who are here at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm still sort of fast asleep, swimming, doing their first lap, then again in the evening. And then we've also got some breakout areas and flexible learning spaces, which is great, because if anybody who works in an educational establishment where they do have flexible learning spaces, it just works so well nowadays, especially with iPad. It really, really does. And again, as we always sort of talk about, moving away from the old Victorian sort of teaching model of teaching from the front, which is just so outdated. And we've also got, which is kind of my most exciting part of the building, if you like, which is a huge auditorium, which includes an interactive floor, interactive wall, and we also have some hologram boxes. Sorry, Tom.
So I've just moved this to the bottom of the screen because I think it's this top right hand corner, that auditorium, right, that gives you all the bits that you need.
Absolutely, yeah, it's great. And it was fantastic because when we first sort of designed it to a certain extent and talked to the head about it, and then she sort of made it happen. It was great because we could have some of the younger years come in and we had a little play, and we put things like fish on the bottom, of the wall, the floor, so they would walk through and the fish would move away from their feet, and have really immersive learning, and the children just absolutely love it. Even the adults love it, I'll be honest. Even sometimes when you have a sort of staff sort of social or a meeting in there where we've got a little bit of time at the end to fire up some of the kit so they can play, and we can play football and things like that with like virtual football and football pitches. It's great.
And there's a great cafe. That's the other thing to add.
Yes, great cafe.
The cake is great there. And then also from the outside there's a hologram or 3D projection on the outside of the building, isn't there? So artwork can be displayed for pupils. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, of course, Tom. Yeah, sorry, you're quite right. So, which is lovely because the girls can because we are an independent girls' school. The girls can send us their designs, and we've also had some students that have learned how to use the software, and they played around with it as well, obviously under supervision, so they can put their own artwork on the windows. It's quite nice when we can welcome guests to the building, and we can showcase the girls' artwork. They love that. And of course, sorry, as well, I was going to say in the bottom left, the solar powered, panels that power the pool and the electricity, as well as we've got a state of the art DT room, which is great, and drama studios and art and textiles as well. So I shouldn't forget them.
No, fantastic. And there is a question in the chat around which MDM you use. I think probably it would be unfair to say where you're moving from to where you're moving to, or maybe I can say to. I don't know. Paul, I'll take this offline with you and give you the explanation behind it. But it is a genuine reason. So just absolutely, we'll share that with you offline. In terms of the leadership, then the team obviously is hugely important. But as a school and a leadership team, obviously you've had to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Would you say that your transition from learning in school to a remote learning kind of method was quite fluid, quite easy? I think it was, but just correct me if I'm wrong. So
no, definitely. It's quite funny. I think because again, it sounds a bit of a cliche, but genuinely hand on heart true. I think when you do what you do every day, it just becomes your kind of normal. And I think because we have been doing this now for so long, when we switched to remote learning, it meant that not only obviously we could keep the school open, but the head and the SLT, so senior leadership team, decided to carry on with the daily timetable of 6 50-minute periods a day, and they've stuck to that. And I think some teachers have found that, it'd be completely unfair to say have found it easy, but they found it more tiring, and actually it's kind of reinforced why they went into teaching in the first place, because they like spending time with the students and physically in the classroom. But actually we have just carried on, and it has been business as usual because we rely so heavily on the devices. All we had to do was implement a video conferencing app so that the lessons have been taking place from home for everybody. And I mean, bar a few hiccups and teething troubles at the beginning, which weren't too bad, to be fair. It's great, and some of the staff and students have upskilled so much. I'm actually looking forward to them physically coming back and seeing the difference. and
you've been able to see everyone's front room or bedroom or whatever it is, because you can see
that too,
so in terms of planning, then it was pretty straightforward. There was some of those additional considerations, I guess, and making sure that they all fitted into your safety policies as well. In terms of adaptation, it's been much more good than bad, hasn't it? And I know that when we I think we came down to see you a little bit just ahead of this, literally just before it all kicked off, it's very clear to see that it's part of the day-to-day use, it's part of the culture of the device. And I think I can see why the transition has probably been a little bit more easy for you guys than it would be maybe for some others. This is one of the questions that people always say to me: what do you think is going to happen in the future, and what does the new normal look like? Actually, it's not normal, right? It is abnormal. But from your perspective, we don't really know what the future might look like, because 3 months ago we didn't know where we would be today. People are talking about, even now in September, certainly in an FE college or an HE perspective, that there is a much more dedicated approach to blended learning, and not everyone will be back on site to learn. What do you think the interaction might be like I guess you're basing it on now, but do you think you will all be back, or are you able to support that blended learning journey?
We're certainly looking at the moment, and our head and senior leadership team are kind of fully committed to coming back September. And I think actually from speaking to quite a lot of my colleagues who work at other schools and friends that I've got, and when we sort of talked about what we've done, they've been quite shocked, which has made me realise actually, yeah, how much, maybe not better, we've coped, but I think because we had these things in place already, it was much kind of smoother transition. But yeah, no, completely. I think it's interesting because we have tried remote learning a little bit previously. We have some students here. We're lucky that we have some students who want to come here because we have very strong links with our tennis academy, with our local tennis club, and they do play all over the world and quite often away and attending tennis fixtures abroad, and they do join in with lessons sometimes remotely. And I think for students who aren't physically able to attend school for whatever reason, then absolutely 100%. I mean, I think if you know already, you know, how well remote learning can work and self-paced learning, then it's already at the back of your mind. But I think now it's put that to the forefront of a lot of people's other people's minds, which can only be a good thing, genuinely.
And absolutely, and I think when you're in a position where you've got that hindsight as well, and you can see the benefits that it's made, and I think it's interesting. So Susie has got a question, and before we answer that, Susie, just in context, I remember working with a trust that were looking at devices. They went down a shared route, so there was sort of 3 in a class, 5 in a class, 7, and so on. And the conversation was that they would never go one-to-one. And the question, so I'm not sure. If you got the full answer to this, Jo, but from a school perspective, did you go one-to-one all in one step, as in it was like, if we're going to do this, everyone's going to have one, or is it actually, it should be a step-by-step process? What do you think the challenges are?
I think definitely at the time they were keen to do more of a step-by-step deployment because they wanted to see how successful it would be. And I think bearing in mind at the time we were one of the sort of early adopters, if you like, of one-to-one mobile learning devices. So it was a kind of, we think it's going to work, but we want to try it, and we don't want to try it with any key year groups, obviously, like year 11, year 12, 13, etc. Because obviously for obvious reasons could impact their exam results if it didn't work. But actually they deployed them to staff first of all, and they had basically from Easter through to the summer holidays to September to familiarise themselves with the devices. And then they were rolled out to a few year groups, and then over the first 3 years that I was at Talbot Heath, they fully rolled them out one-to-one. But one-to-one was always the plan. Personally, I completely understand it depends on funding and budget, but if you can afford one-to-one, absolutely one-to-one every time.
And I think it also comes down to capacity of staff, and you know, the bigger picture, the holistic view of that is, what does the classroom look like? And I've been talking, in fact, to a couple of people on this webinar around, if that's the blended learning approach, what is the video conferencing tool? So not a question, but actually there's some specific concerns that we need to adhere to, or that we need to answer. And I think the reality is a teacher first approach, and again, this is based on projects that I've worked on, is a teacher first approach one-to-one is really powerful. And there's some research that shows the uplift and the benefits of having a teacher with a device, even if students don't have one, and the cost efficiencies around that. And then using the device as a one-to-one tool also then becomes very powerful. And you've got to look at where you're going to make those positive changes as well, but be aware of where you might hit a roadblock and what that might look like. And Susie, absolutely happy to have a further conversation around that as well, if needed. Examinations, really key topic. One of the things that Matt Pullen and I, and you know, Matt talked about was, what if we hit pause on the world and either redid it and started again next year? I know it's a bit fluffy. Or what if we continue through December? So my son's in year 6. If he carried on to year 6 in December and then went into secondary school in January, but there would be no examinations. The reality is examinations have to happen at some point. But what do they look like for you in the future, do you think?
It's a really interesting question, actually, genuinely, because it's something that I feel quite strongly about, and this is very much my personal opinion, is because when I worked in IT previously, the IT industry exams that I took were all online, and that kind of makes more sense, obviously, depending on the job that I was going into. And we do get valid questions sometimes from parents, and we've had people say before, but it's really important that my child learns to handwrite, etc. Of course it is, goes without saying. They're always going to be kind of a complementary device. But at the same time, I think how often I personally handwrite things now as part of my job, and most of my colleagues as well. And I think actually it's fair to say they use a computer or a mobile device far more actually to produce work than they do handwritten work. And now I think we've definitely seen more of a switch. And our exams officer, our previous exams officer, he's now one of our assistant heads, he had looked into it for certain students, and we're having more students, especially students with SEN or EAL issues, who do need to type exam entries into their GCSEs, etc., and they have a laptop or mobile device. Now we do nearly all of our entrance exams online. We have forms to collate data and things like that. So nearly all of it is done online. And I think now, because of the instant assessment options as well, it's focused on marking. And when you think about the old style of marking, I know there will always be some subjects, obviously, that sort of lend themselves better to a human marking sort of system. But if it's just a kind of multiple choice or, a definitive answer looking for keywords, then actually, why don't we cut out the middleman and have it done via a computer system? So absolutely, I'm sure that most exams in the future, and probably not too distant future, will move to online.
I think it's always going to be a topic of conversation, and that is a personal opinion, isn't it? It's everyone's got their own view on it. Interestingly enough, I was talking to a school recently who were delivering their course or their schoolwork through G Suite, Google Classroom, but they were also telling parents that because it was being done remotely, they wouldn't then be marking it because they didn't have the time. So it's a bit confusing, and it's just having that conversation. And again, that workflow is key. So that's from reducing teacher workload, feedback, to delivering work, to students delivering work back, and then getting that peer-to-peer feedback, because it's really vital. And the use of technology allows so many different ways of giving that assessment and feedback is really important. In terms of I guess the next steps then from your perspective, just conscious looking at the time, future plans. So lessons we know we've already kind of touched on. Future plans. I know that we're talking to you around some of the additional accessories. So you're talking about Apple Pencil, keyboards, keyboard cases. One of the things around the new iPad OS is absolutely the use of a trackpad or mouse, which I think is hugely powerful. I'm an iPad Pro user, obviously, heavily. What are your future plans look like? Maybe even ahead of what we've spoken about.
It's been really interesting, actually, because I remember a couple of years ago, and also I was going to say, as part of our Apple journey, if you like, and our journey with iPad, Apple have been really, really supportive, and we couldn't have done it without them, the same as we couldn't have done it without, a great provider such as academia. And I think through going to sessions, it's true though, genuinely, it is true. It is. It makes a massive difference. I was going to say before as well, with other suppliers, the school looked at and perhaps used at the start of their journey, we've had nowhere near as much support and as many events, and free events as well, because obviously money is important at the moment more than ever. And I've come away and I thought, do you know what, actually I think we need some of these Apple Pencils, let's get a few key people in the school to try them. And it's been a complete game changer, to the point where our head sort of said at the beginning of lockdown, right, let's get pencils out to every member of staff, every member of teaching staff, because actually the ones that had them found them so useful. And lots of students now have used them in lessons. And I mean, my personal plan, I'd love to get an Apple Pencil for every single student in the school. It might take a little bit of swaying with our finance department, but at the same time, lots of the parents have bought them. The students have asked for them for Christmas, and there's so many new technology, more technology coming out all the time. And again, let's not do technology just for technology's sake. Let's do it because it makes an actual impact, on student learning and teaching.
And I think that goes back to the decision of why iPad and what is your the Apple Pencil. I remember when we were at the regional training centre. You are one of those, and we were at the regional training centre in Birmingham. And I remember the Apple Pencil at that point had come out, and we were doing that exercise in the church kind of park area, and they were doing the measurement.
Yeah.
And it's just, and I remember you saying
Yeah.
afterwards, how do we get these? And there was a kind of a light bulb moment as actually it's not just a shiny new toy. This could have a massive impact. And I think I certainly got the feeling very recently or earlier on in the year when I was very fortunate to get hold of the trackpad, the new Magic Keyboard for iPad Pro, and the trackpad's built in, and it just makes a massive difference in the way that you use the device. So I think as well, going forwards, as part of that sustainability and the planning of what the next steps might be is really important, because you have to kind of build that in, don't you, and look at what that might bring. And another question from the chat here about the leasing enables the refreshing of the product every 3 years. Would you prefer to buy outright, or would you recommend? So before, maybe you answer that, Jo, and then I'll give my take on it. So yeah.
100% leasing for us, honestly, genuinely 100%. In fact, when they first thought about implementing iPads at the school, they actually bought the first sort of 65 for most of the staff members. And actually, it was a bit of a nightmare by the end of it, because sort of 3, maybe 4 years down the line, we was not stuck with all these devices, because I mean, they were still useful, but obviously things like iOS, it doesn't update fully, and lots of apps don't update, etc. So you just run around, unless you've got a really patient and huge IT department trying to fix all these problems. It was just a bit of a nightmare, really. So yeah, leasing is for us been completely the right answer.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. One of the things that I was talking about at BET this year was about the amount of what we call ineffective computers in schools. I think there's 1.1 million computers in the UK in the primary and secondary sector that are classed as ineffective, and they are devices that either don't turn on, don't have the right software, not being updated. But that's the equivalent of 24 laptops in a primary school and 130 odd in a secondary school. One of the things that we have traditionally seen, and there's a big shift in the industry away from capital spend, is about being able to budget. The leasing option allows you to plan, is about the ability to plan the budgets, because you know then on your year what your spend is going to be, knowing that at the end of that period of time you can hand the devices back, versus maybe having those devices last for 3 years and then say, I'm going to keep them for another 2 years, and actually you end up keeping them for 7 or 8 years. Now, it doesn't mean to say if they are 7 or 8 years old that they don't have some value in usage, but they may not have the latest software or can't have the latest software and everything else. And I think that somebody's raised a valid point around the word sustainable, and I appreciate also, because I know the person it's coming from, it's an important conversation piece to have. And when we talk about being sustainable, from my perspective on a project, it's really about making sure that we can continue that longevity of that journey, because what we've unfortunately been able to see quite historically is an influx. Let's say a school has a new build, they build a whole new building, they put all the new technology in, and that's great for the first 2 years, but then later down the line, those devices or the building can't be kept up to date, and it becomes untenable and it becomes unusable. And I think also what we're trying to do with the use of technology is also how do we make the budgets that are available last better, or get more return for the spend. And this comes down with a project I remember working on a trust where they had 1,400 pupils in a secondary school, and they were printing 6 million copies of paper in a 6-month period. That was £75,000 in that 6-month period. And for me, that isn't a sustainable way of working. So Paul, I apologize if it's been used in the wrong way. It absolutely wasn't intended that way. But again, Susie, I think going back to your question around capital spend and leasing, I think actually we see some blended approaches. Sometimes there is a pot of money that has to be spent in a certain way, or it's coming from a certain area that has to be used. And so outright purchasing can have an impact. But equally, we need to look at all the options available. And going back to what we were talking about, the planning of the journey, Jo, is knowing having an answer as to what barriers you might face means that you can make a better informed decision. So I think you've rightly said. And by the way, I think when we worked with you in the first instance, we were able to give you a little bit of money back, but we took away the old stuff and gave you some money back, which then went into the new project. And that's something absolutely that we would see as a benefit. So go on, Jo, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say as well that we have, it was a really valid point actually you said about the printing, because I know you asked me that before, but we did have some resistance from the staff at first, some of the staff, not all of them, about trying to go, paperless, and I think we'll never fully go paperless, but at the same time it's been, having a printing solution has been a real game changer for us, because we don't waste the printouts. And also the other thing I was going to say is we have a partner school in Rwanda, which is really nice. We have some staff and students that go there out there every year, so they give them some of the older kit, which is still absolutely fine, but because we're one of the schools that we try and put ourselves at the forefront of technology here, we do deeply care about sustainability. And also by giving the students the devices and giving them access to this technology, it also inspires them. And we've had students that have won awards for things like things that will affect the environmental issues and things like that. So it kind of is, like a double-edged sword. And I completely get that, but it's really wonderful, because I thought, well, hang on a minute, they're not going to have Wi-Fi out in the partner school in Rwanda. Apparently, they've got great Wi-Fi. So I mean, who knew? But it's great to see them using them.
And actually, in that part of the world, actually, there are some countries who absolutely have really powerful infrastructure. It's just the rest of it that comes with that. So I guess. There's been some questions throughout, which has been great. I don't know if there are any other questions that people maybe want to ask us in the chat, and we can answer those. But whilst we're potentially waiting for those, Jo, I just wanted to say a huge thank you, both from myself and Ryan, who's been hiding in the background, being the MC as the quiet MC. But we're absolutely delighted to be a continued working partner with Talbot Heath. We're very proud of our relationship with you guys, and it would be absolutely great to be able to do another webinar, maybe in 6 months' time, and see where you are. And you may have another new Steam hub on top of the other one. I remember seeing that when that was being built, and we were on the roof seeing it all. Incredible. And I have to say that the school is fantastic. So congratulations to you and the team. And it looks like there are no other questions at the moment. What we'll do, Jo, is we'll cut the cameras and the microphones, and I'll continue to play music, and we'll stay on for a couple of minutes. And then if there are any questions, we'll be happy to do that. If anyone's got anything offline, I should have added it here. Feel free to get in touch with us, and we will obviously reach out to you directly. So we have a question. So we'll answer this live, I guess. What type of iPad have you used? We've gone for iPad Pros for teachers with keyboards and Apple Pencil, and Airs for keyboards with students. I think it's pretty much a kind of a similar. You've got a kind of that ratio, haven't you, Jo, for your stuff?
Very, very similar. I'm actually quite jealous, because I would love for us to have pros for all of the teaching staff. But I might have a bit of trouble swinging that in the moment. But absolutely, we've got some pros in the school. But then, we have got some other Macs and PCs here as well. So it's not just the mobile devices. But absolutely. And we've got pencils for everybody. We've got keyboards for quite a few members of staff now, but they're absolutely growing. So absolutely, that's perfect. Yeah. Great.
All right. So we'll I guess we'll just leave the chat open for a little bit. Jo, thank you very much again. As I said, we're really hugely grateful. I'm going to ask you just to cut your camera and your mic, and I'll start playing the music.
No problem.
And we'll speak to you soon.
And thank you so much to you guys as well. You're always brilliant, and I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Jo. Cheers. Thank you everyone for being with us today. It's been really great to have you listen. And if there is anything we can do, we'd love to speak to you. And we wish you the great rest of the day. Thank you very much.